Let's get to the main course. Time to learn a little bit. This is gonna get huge for a second. Ignore it. RPSing and you. I made a educational kind of document yesterday. I talked about risk reward, basically how situations can change these sort of things. Risk reward is not always equal. All of these things are important to understand before you can even understand RPS. You cannot be good at RPSing without understanding risk reward. It's impossible. There are situations or patches where you can actually get past not understanding risk reward as much. This is why typically players end up being patch players. A lot of people tend to not understand what makes their options strong or what options are powerful. They kind of don't understand why things work, then it means that they're gonna have way less consistency if the options that they default to gets nerfed. Like Soul Success is a great example. A lot of people didn't know how to play neutral with Soul. They knew how to use Soul Success. So when they nerfed Soul Success, a lot of people just were unable to play neutral. And that's a huge part of why he fell off. It's very easy to over-abuse a powerful option and then not compensate. You can create an RPS situation out of any risk reward, but your opponent does not need to play RPS. So this is going to be a kind of complex concept. Let's say you play Soul. You either do 6H round start, bar S, or 2S. You can create an RPS situation out of this. Most people cannot beat 6H round start or cover all of these options. Thus, inherently, it can create an RPS situation, meaning some characters can beat 6H, some characters can beat far slash, some characters can beat 2S, but usually you cannot beat all of them at once, which means if you were to look at this situation, your opponent is foul. Just naturally, the risk reward is skewed against you, right? If you just force shit like this all the time. Faust cannot match the damage Soul does. By cycling these habits, Faust knows you're 6H far slash 2S. So even though you can force this, right? This is forcing an RPS situation. He could just choose to block, right? Every time, just block. And the reason for this is when risk reward becomes a factor, usually it involves playing really bad risk reward consistently. The answer is almost always to just play safer or to interact more intelligently, as in you do not just RPS with them every time because you have the option. Think of it like this. It's like a turn-based game, right? Think of it like a turn-based game. Let's say you use 6H. 6H beats most options bar 2. Turn 1, Faust uses block. Quotations beats most committal option. Even though all Faust did was block, this is an RPS situation, right? This is an interaction that is RPS, right? When risk reward becomes a factor, so let's say 6H is heavily punishable, right? Usually the more gamble heavy or kind of high risk an option is, the more essentially avoiding the RPS situation by simply choosing to not commit is usually going to be the most advantageous. You may think, well, if I do that, right, you run up throw, beats most options. This can create an RPS situation in itself, right, just by you not choosing to represent an option. And this is where a lot of people end up fumbling with understanding this. A lot of people will be like, well, they're just gonna run up throw me if I just do nothing or something like that. But even in this, the situation is a lot different. Already, this has created another type of RPS situation that is not one-to-one. This has created preemptive RPS versus reactionary. Essentially, round start at the very beginning, usually people are just committing to an option and predict. Sometimes they'll back up and try to whiff punish or something like that, which it's a big thing to consider because one is a lot more reliable than the other. Preemptive is you are sticking to pure RPS and raw risk reward, which means usually characters that have more consistent return are usually the ones that excel at preemptive RPS and the ones that usually force it the most. Fantastic example is Soul, Nago, Ran, right? These are great examples. What makes him powerful, again, if you've watched my stream for a long time, you'll know I talk about him being kind of the perfect RPS character. His whole game plan is to make you RPS. And he's kind of the exception of this where he excels at reactionary and preemptive RPS together. Not only just making you commit to stuff preemptively and punishing you, but he's also very good at with punishing you consistently as well. Whereas characters like Kai or Faust usually are they're a lot weaker in preemptive RPS, but a lot more powerful on reactionary. In this sort of case, Faust blocks, but he just reacts to your approach, and Soul has committed in ways that essentially can get covered by doing nothing, right? This is what I mean. They do not need to play RPS with you. Just because you can force RPS does not exactly mean that they're gonna play RPS with you. Faust, in this situation, again, like inherently, if you compare these two options, he's like way behind in risk reward, but in both cases, it makes him like he's still able to come out ahead by using one single option, right? This is where a lot of people tend to fail with RPS situations. They understand like how to create an RPS situation like this, but they don't understand the risk reward, right? It's evenfold. This is not to say like you are bad if you don't understand this. A lot of this is very matchup heavy, and it's also character dependent, and it's also patch dependent. When you understand these sort of concepts in general, though, it becomes a lot easier to implement them into different games and recognize like what's good risk reward, what's bad risk reward. In fact, the thing I'm talking about here, this is why Punk is so good, because not only is he fantastic at forcing RPS, he is incredible at reactionary RPS as well. One of my favorite things in fighting games in general is the people that are like, I don't like games with a lot of RPS. My brother, every fighting game is RPS. Like the higher up you go, the more it will just essentially boil down into these interactions. If you don't like this concept, like it will boil down to this no matter what. Like you're never going to escape it. You can make it more stable. No matter how unstable like a concept is, there are things you can do to make yourself more consistent. I used to think that high level players just play the smartest / safest way possible and not gamble. That's a common misconception, right? It's so funny because like people will talk about like high level fighting games, but they don't understand even like half. This is kind of a perfect example of like how RPS can happen in anything, right? Like any sort of interaction can force this, but you don't always have to engage in it. You can, and it can create another thing. From this, Soul uses microdash to pay or 2D. I use Faust actually because that's you. You are Soul. You uses. Tries to react to your approach and gets countered. This situation has created another RPS situation, because now you cannot play purely reactionary. And even though this RPS is not entirely good, it has created an RPS situation that is good. You use microdash, H2D again, Faust blocks, and does not press anything. It's up to you to figure out, is this good? Is this an option that I think they can deal with? You know, there are players that predominantly fuzzy jump on defense. There are players that predominantly backdash, that will predominantly mash. Depending on the playstyle, if you're constantly just playing like bad RPS, that's like, let's say you do Vortex or 6H or something like that all the time, and they just block and they're not engaging with you, you're playing RPS, but you're just losing because it's bad RPS, right? And it's bad RPS through risk reward. Think of it as like a card game, right? No matter what, they can always just pass their turn. They can always choose to just do nothing and let you die. You don't have to take the maxi challenge. That's a good way to put it. Exactly. Preemptive RPS versus reactionary. Preemptive usually means that you are just committing to something as fast as possible, right? Like usually as soon as it comes up, you just do it. Essentially, you're just choosing an option that means that you think that either you'll win through it being fast enough, or you can, like, they're gonna be scared. Usually high damage. Consistently forcing RPS situations with low damage are usually very bad, because how you weigh an RPS option depends on matchup. But like, let's give an example. Preemptive RPS like May Dolphin, right? Against Faust, looks like he got run over by a bug. May Dolphin against Leo, you're dead. We're just gonna leave it at that, right? Using the threat of an option is strong, but usually it's only strong if the threat of the option is high enough to really warrant a specific response. May Dolphin against Leo, it's a lot different of a situation than May Dolphin against Faust, right? Leo can just react, right? Leo sees you do H Dolphin or S. Leo players already have fucking flash kick on deck, but you're gonna give them a reason to actually really look for it. That shit will never hit them, because one, the threat of an option does not exist, because it's just so easily dealt with. Preemptive play becomes more more powerful, the more reactionary they try to be against a specific option. This is why I can like essentially autopilot at a higher level, break it down into these ways of thinking about it, and it's a lot easier to just play the game. If they try to whiff punish, you can usually be more committal with the type of option you choose. This is a very common thing that a lot of people tend to do, right? A lot of people will do this without even thinking about it. The way they go about it is what kind of cost them, right? So like when I talk about preemptive versus reactionary, a lot of people may think like, oh, well, they're just blocking, I'm gonna go run up throw. That is not a great RPS situation. That can be something that essentially will work against you, right? Because let's say if you hit a throw, it's like low damage, maybe higher turn off the situation that follows. If you whiff a throw, you could die, right? Depending on character, you could literally go 100 to 0 against. Usually the better option is to choose a powerful either lock string starter using Fafnir preemptively to start my offense. It creates another RPS situation, but they're looking for you to preemptively swing with a bigger button, which in turn can create a better RPS situation through movement. That as we talk about this, the options will only get safer or less committal. All RPS situations vary per situation in matchup, but also depending on the playstyle of your opponent. Not only this, not all RPS selections are equal, even in the way you use them. Fafnir in neutral is a blatant call out if your opponent is just doing nothing, right? Like this is something you block and you're like, I'm gonna start holding my ground a bit better. Run up far S is a lot less telling of a situation or a call out or what you're looking for. Information and what you tell your opponent matters. The problem with RPS though, again caveat, this is assuming they understand the RPS situation they're in general. If they do not, you will win. If you put someone into a situation that they constantly play RPS around, they don't understand the risk reward or they don't know why you're doing something, it's hard for them to beat you, right? It's quite hard. Character matchups can create poor RPS situations. This is usually where bad matchups are relevant. Usually in modern games, there's way more system mechanics in newer games, and they essentially are padding for a lot of bad matchups. Like Nago vs Soul, for example. Not because the character is just like, oh, the character's broken or whatever. It's because fundamentally, they just like, it can create bad RPS situations. This is why a lot of people who complain about bad matchups, especially at higher levels or like mid levels, tend to like stop improving because they'll end up getting to a point where it doesn't matter what I do, the RPS is always bad. You have to be built like a god to win consistently like this. If I want to be good, I would want to either embrace that, what I've talked about, which I believe is essentially not consistent. I don't believe in that. There are players that can do it, but I don't believe in it. At least I'm not capable of doing it. I focus on over-respecting as a general rule and then approaching safely from there. A lot of people will think like, oh, you're just gambling all the time, or you're just flailing all the time. But the problem is, fighting games are also interactions with your playstyle, like the opponent of your playstyle. If you do not respect that, you are inherently going to be a worse player than players that do play like this. A very common trend is downplaying people who essentially are more RPS heavy because I guess like a lot of people don't understand how relevant RPS is in fighting games. Again, fighting games are built around RPS. The higher up you go in the totem pole here, the more you're going to RPS or be forced to RPS. Because of the first thing here, in fact, I'm going to bold this. These two things here, if you were to really like break down the common two ways of viewing this would be a gamble heavy player and a quotation clean player. One is not better than the other. The nature of how they play means depending on playstyle of your opponent in matchup and situations, you will end up having more success against someone rather than someone else. You're gonna find players that either excel kind of playing slower or clean, or more gamble heavy. Again, one is not better than the other. It's usually the players themselves and how they approach it and how they understand things. As an over-respecting player, you will probably create more situations where defensive or reactionary interactions are better. Is gambling really about risk reward? Is it about getting in your opponent's head? I am more of a believer of the former. Some people believe the latter. It depends on what school of thought you're from. There's not one better than the other. Because of how fighting games are, you will never be right 100% of the time. If you commit to RPSing, you must accept the consequences. I know that sounds weird as fuck. If you choose an option and it doesn't work, it is on you. It is up to you as a player to understand RPS interactions and risk reward. When you understand that why is this dude doing so much damage, it's because you did jump 2k, you will understand RPSing and why I talk about ownership of your actions. If you just get angry about the character, one, this is detrimental. A lot of people will do this and they'll just complain about the interaction instead of just being like, I need to step back and reassess this. This is actually how a lot of people will get tilted. Oh, actually, again, Soul vs. Nago is perfect. Because of how the neutral is as established, right? It means that you have to approach things in different ways if you also want to approach it safely, right? RPS is usually between offensive options. RPS is usually established as a offensive rotation of options. In matchups like Nago versus Soul, where the range is different, like essentially Soul will be outranged and outdamaged consistently, it means that you usually will need to play more defensive or use the threat of options more as an RPS option. So like what I mean by this is neutral jumps, movement is a lot more valuable. Again, this boils down into the end game goal is to force your opponent to commit to something that you can beat without committing. Movement can be committal, but if you can make people switch without actually committing, then that means that you are going to have way more success. Even if, like, let's say Soul versus Nago, you neutral jump. Nago reacts, presses 2H. You just did neutral jump, you land, and you run up far side. You started your own offense without taking any risks. Essentially, that is the success. You outplayed Nago, right? That's essentially how it. But a lot of people don't view it like this because no damage? Question mark. So understanding this is also very important for improving because it'll also help you figure out the less risks you take. Again, like if you do not play like this, right? Let's say you just force aggressive options, you will almost always lose to someone equally skilled as you. When you incorporate like movement, neutral jumps, things like that, it becomes more around how comfortable the other player is with you. All right, now we're cycling back again. All RPS situations vary per situation and matchup, but also depending on the playstyle of your opponent. This will still create another RPS situation, assuming they are equally skilled as you at understanding it. Make the opponent uncomfortable. Honestly, a lot of it is kind of making them uncomfortable. It's about taking advantage of like kind of their strong spots, you know?